Hi, I'm James McGuire, editor of Datamation, and our topic today is how to hire a mobile app developer. To talk about that, we've got three industry experts. With us is Tim Connor, president of Cloud City Development. Hello to you, Tim.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, good. So you are in San Francisco, right?
Yes, we're based in San Francisco on the western end of Soma, like 11th and Mission.
And what sort of work do you typically do? What kind of projects?
We do web and mobile apps, design and development, mainly for startups, not entirely. We have some enterprise clients. Often early stage, sometimes scaling it up, all around the range of basically, if you need to get something built, we can build it.
Great. Also with us is Ruben Patel. He is the CTO and managing director of Mercurium. Hello to you, Ruben.
Hello, James. How are you?
And we see Atlanta in the background, right? That's very hip.
That is part of Atlanta. We are trying to become the next Silicon Valley.
I believe it. What sort of work does Mercurium do?
So I've got a company that basically does consulting CTO work. We work across the spectrum with SaaS application development, SaaS product application development, as well as mobile development. And as things have moved on through time, almost every web-based product development shop needs a mobile app as well. So we always think of it in terms of companion applications and additional functionality that maybe the mobile form factor could provide that the web form factor doesn't provide.
Mm-hmm. Also with us is Alex Kira, a principal consultant for Parallel Minds. Hello to you, Alex.
Hi, James. How are you?
Good, good. And you're also based in San Francisco, correct?
Yes, we're out of San Francisco, Soma area.
And what sort of work do you typically do?
So we're kind of a small full-stack shop. We basically do, for mobile applications, we do iOS apps as well as hybrid apps, and then we also work with normal web and back-end apps, mostly Ruby-based applications. But we work with kind of across the gamut, startups as well as bigger companies as well, so kind of cover that.
Great. So getting started, I mean, I'm thinking there's a company out there who's very successful as a company. They realize that having a mobile app would be a competitive advantage, but they know nothing about mobile apps. I mean, they know their own business, but they don't know mobile applications at all. So they've decided, hey, we need one of those things. What kind of advice would you give that company? I mean, how did they get started in the process of hiring a mobile development team? What are some of the first steps? Tim, what's your sense of that? How would a company get started with that?
I think some of the most important things they can do aren't actually just on the development side. Product and design is really where it all comes from. So before, some of the most important steps start even before really defining a problem, knowing how expensive development is, where tens to hundreds of thousands to millions would involve scaling up. So really wanting to solve their business goals and come in, know who your users are. We tend to drive everything lean UX style from user studies. So we can help you through the process, but it definitely is useful if before you even get started, this is our business goal, we're trying to get funding, or we're trying to get to this number of users, here's the type of users we have, here's all of our existing stuff. The more you can bring to the table, the more we can intelligently discuss what we can help you build. After that, it's really finding developers you can find a trust and rapport with, that you work day to day very closely with.
Ruben, your sense of how a company would get started, what are some things they need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I echo a lot of Tim's sentiments. I would start with definitely the business use cases, understanding whether the target users of this application are really interested in content, are they interested in entertainment, gaming, that sort of thing. Is it a very socially connected application? Just kind of having a good idea of the target user, and then designing the application around that target user base. And also on the business side, understanding what's going to maximize the benefit to the entity producing that application. If it's a consumer products-oriented or consumer software-oriented company like a video gaming company, they are going to get revenue through engagement on that application day in, day out. If it's a SaaS business platform, they're going to get application kudos for having that in their portfolio. So really the business motivation has to be taken into account.
Mm-hmm. Alex, what's your sense? I mean, if a company is going to be hiring a development team, what are some questions that they want to ask? I mean, obviously there's many development teams out there. how do you pick the one that really fits for your business or your product? What are some sort of questions that allow you to cut through the clutter?
Sure, and I think I definitely agree with what Ruben and Tim said. You definitely need to do your homework, and the more information you have before you approach a development company, the better off you're going to be. So figuring out your customers, your target audience, and then kind of figuring out maybe their personas. Are they going to be using a desktop application at one place with the mobile app in another place? Kind of what the different strategies are, and then you also might want to start thinking about what platform you're going to target. Because depending on what platform you're going to hit, different development shops are going to have different skill sets. So, are you going to be doing a native iOS app or a native Android app? Or you can get into the hybrid apps using PhoneGap, or you can just go for a pure responsive web design application as well. So, depending on which one you're going to pick, that's probably going to affect your choice of which development shop you're going to use as well. The other thing I think that would be great is if you knew kind of what data, especially for enterprise, what data you're going to leverage out of your systems, and how is that data going to be accessible? Because a lot of times, that getting the data out of the APIs, defining those APIs, could be even more work than some of the mobile development work that you're going to be doing. So basically, having all that information ahead of time is going to be able to ask, so then you can ask each shop that you talk to what their skill set is and what experience they have in your chosen platform that you're going to be targeting, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, getting the data. It's sort of like, does the company need a back end rebuilt or built, or they really just need a mobile app, or do they need both those things? The product could scale pretty well really quickly. It could scale really largely really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. That's going to determine the cost. If you just need someone to develop your mobile application and you already have the API defined, maybe you have the project management skills as well, the UX resources, that's going to be a lot different, where the shop's going to have to do everything, including API, project management, UX, all themselves. So it's going to look like a completely different equation, essentially. So
right. Tim, what questions, if someone hired you just to hire the perfect web development team, or if you actually own the business yourself, you're going to hire another web development team, what sort of questions would you ask them to see if they really knew their stuff, or if they were a good fit for your company?
So there's not going to be one magical question that you can ask. That's the problem. Otherwise our jobs would all be a lot easier. Like Google and Microsoft famously used to have trick questions, where if you get the trick, then you get the job, and if you don't, you don't.
Right.
So it's more, and any developer, if you're hiring, unless you're super technical and you're possibly not listening to this talk because you already know all the answers, the developer is going to be able to out-talk you on the tech side anyways. So they could, unless you're really well educated, they could be feeding you a line. So it's more than just a question. Is sit down, talk through the process with them, talk through how they built similar things, what the working relationship will be like. How committed to this whole thing are you? We work very hand in hand with our clients as partners, every day delivering value. So we try to say that within the first week, if you're not seeing results, and you keep hearing how much longer it'll take their problems. So
you actually put a 1 week time. You throw out the figure 1 week.
Well, within the first day, something should be done.
Okay.
Some of that might just be design. So if we're doing design, then how are you liking the design process? How is the relationship working? All of the best projects that go the best have very good relationships. Most of our work comes from word-of-mouth referral because people are happy with us. Mm-hmm. And that social proof does make an even better working relationship. So can you picture from your discussion of how we help talk you through what you're trying to build, how long it'll take, what the technology choices are, what the day-to-day working will be like? I mean, you certainly will ask lots of questions about technology, why they justify it, what their portfolio is, but there's not. You could ask infinite questions, but there's not like one easy one that solves it.
Ruben, is there a magical question that you would recommend? Like, oh, if I get a good answer to this particular question, they really know their stuff.
No, I mean, it's the practical reality is these things are fairly complex, and as Tim said, if it were that easy, there would be a lot of people in technology without jobs. But practically speaking, I think a good place to start is to look at their resume, if you will. And today, your resume is really online. You have applications that you've built, if you're a developer, that are out there. You can have a look at the quality of those apps. You can ask questions about the team structure on on that project to build the app? Were they the lead? Were they just one contributing member of the team? What do they actually do? You can do reference checks. I mean, these are standard things you would do for any employee. Reference checks are always great, right? Especially if they've done work for any other clients. You can ask them for 3 references, give them a call, and see how good of a job they did. But I think, frankly, before you get into all the details of qualifying potential developer for your project, you should just decide what type of product you're building. If you're building a game and you're going to primarily a business development application firm, you may not get exactly the results that you want, even if they get good references, because that's not their specialty.
Right.
And potentially vice versa. So first, understanding the type of app, and then targeting the developers that have kind of built apps in that domain is a good start. And then you can do all the typical reference checking and checking out their portfolio, their skill sets, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at a project, I'll add, if you're looking at a project or a product that's going to be long-lasting, it's not just a one-shot app, you'd also want to consider that, has this development shop or team been around with clients for a long time, or do they just do short engagements, get in and get out? Because that'll leave you in a lurch later on. So you want a partner that will kind of be with you for the duration of your product development lifecycle.
Can I actually jump into +1 what Ruben just said there?
Sure.
So many people don't think about what comes next, and I'm always encouraging my clients to be hiring, and discussing what happens when we wrap up with you and transition on is very important, not just for the selecting that they're a dev shop that cares what happens after and works with you on that, but it's the probably #1 most under-considered thing.
What do you mean when what happens next in what sense? You mean that when the app is done, it's out in the field, it's being used? Is it done?
We're getting away from, the web has long since proven agile, and mobile development is a little slower development cycle, but it is still a continuous process. So it's not like you ship an app and it's done and out there. It's more, you shipped an app and now you're getting more feedback. So if you haven't already started getting feedback and considered that you were basically buying a baby, you have something now for the rest of your life. And
Right.
you can get any of us who will do great work and then think, okay, now I'm done and I don't have any budget left, and we've launched it. And if any developer puts you in that spot, then they've left you high and dry.
Right.
I'm definitely talking how they work with clients after the fact, how we help train up your engineers on the job, stuff like that.
What about typical pitfalls or like problems that often happen? I mean, Alex, what have you seen out there? Like, oh, this always goes south, or this misunderstanding is really typical. I mean, what kind of common pitfalls do you see in terms of hiring a mobile app developer?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that could go wrong is you develop the wrong product. So I'm kind of a big fan of the kind of lean startup approach, where you kind of do some experimentation. You launch your MVP, and then you refine from what you learn from that MVP versus spending 6 months to a year launching a huge product and then kind of realizing that that you've built the wrong product. And depending on what kind of outsourcing you're talking about, you hear stories about people in Elance and some of those things where they don't, the project never finishes, or they don't get access to the code base and things like that. So you kind of do get what you pay for in that term. So you just need to make sure to have kind of a development shop that's going to write maintainable code, unit test your code. So basically have a long-term view of things where you can kind of not just shoot out an app and then leave you hanging. It's write an app in a well-based best practices manner that you can kind of maintain in the long run, and then pair program with your team if team's going to be taking over that pair program with them, so that the essentially the app doesn't go over budget. It's not the wrong product. There's no bugs, things like that. So that's kind of some of the pitfalls that can go wrong. And then the one other thing that I would mention is that to echo Tim, make sure to insist on working software all the time. So the first couple of weeks you should start seeing software in your hands versus having to wait 6 months, and then that's going to be the wrong product that you weren't envisioning in the beginning of the process.
You're saying there'd be a partially working prototype within a few weeks?
Yeah, and you should definitely communicate with your shop frequently. In an agile-based methodology, you can have daily stand-ups, have working software at the end of the sprints that you can actually have on your phone and play with, and that's very important versus having to wait, end of the project, and then you realize you've gotten the wrong product developed.
A prototype's a little different, but yeah, you should be getting some of your features working. Like, if you want us to build a prototype, we'll build you something more throwaway, all of us. But even if you're not building a prototype, if you're not seeing something delivered, what's going on? What are they doing? And really common with outsourcers, particularly offshore, you could be months in, and they've just piled up all this code that doesn't quite work, and then you're stuck with this pile, and they expect you to pay the bill. I think Alex and I, it sounds like, have cleaned up after some of the same sorts before. The biggest pitfall, I think, is when outsourcing is thinking that cheap saves you money rather than cheap costs you a whole lot of money. So I definitely seen that going with like an independent who seems will quote you lower is going to cost you a lot more when you get press mentions and your site is down and you come to us and you spent your budget and you're like, now fix it. And we're like, okay.
Ruben, what sort of horror stories have you heard, or what are some typical misunderstandings that companies need to be aware of before they go out and spend their money on a mobile app?
Well, I mean, I think it's all the stuff that Tim and Alex have been talking about. I think the post. So there's two, I guess, categories. I would say one is the experience that you have with the development shop while the app is being built. Are you getting feature drops regularly? Are you getting status updates regularly? Are you getting what you thought you were buying? So there are a lot of cases where you're not getting anything close to what you thought you were buying, and you end up having to abandon with that shop and move on to another shop. But I think the most horrifying stories are the ones that happen after the app's been released and you actually have paying customers. Because at this point, you don't have the luxury of just simply picking up and going to another shop. You've got a working code base out there. And so I had a client not too long ago who I'll leave unmentioned, but they had an app in production with thousands of users out there, and their previous developers had decided to go off and do something else, and simply said they weren't interested in helping do any more development.
Sure, we all change our mind.
Yeah, and it's particularly problematic in this day and age where there's so many new technologies and there's a lot of competition for developers, and developers can just get tired or burnt out and decide to take a trip to Europe for half a year.
Sure.
So that can leave you as a business in a bit of a problem. And essentially, in this case, what ended up happening is they took all the keys with them, if you will. So all the keys to update the application also were not properly handed over to the company. The company didn't know to ask for that. They also used old versions of libraries that needed to be upgraded for camera access, things like that. So horror stories probably have a wide range. I think the worst are probably after an app has been successful and you need to change it or update it or fix some bugs.
Right.
You definitely need access to the make sure to ask access for the source code, as well as any app store permissions and things like that that you would need. Because there's definitely horror stories of people having developed a product and not getting access to their source code and being held ransom for that. So
and they say, oh, well, I have this app, and you're like, well, where's the code? And they're like, what does that mean? You don't actually have an app. You have someone else built an app, and you have to get that from them.
So it's the exact opposite of open source. Not only is it proprietary, only the developer, him or herself, knows the source code.
And the worst horror story I've seen in this has actually happened repeatedly enough to become a trope, that the developer actually had a nervous breakdown and went severely unbalanced, while developing the code. One of them, he kept writing, so it was Lovecraftian code.
He went off his meds in the middle of the project?
What was that?
He went off his meds in the middle of the project?
Yeah, I don't want to shame mental health issues.
No.
I think what happens is under the stress of a untechnically skilled product person, a independent developer who doesn't have is alone by themselves, just sort of, and they're behind the ball and they can't quite get done, and someone's asking unrealistic amounts.
Right.
They just start hedging, and the pressure, they just break under it. But yeah, this project it was relying on syntax errors to run, it was invalid code. It was and then 4 developers after independents trying to spend as little as possible to fix it, layered on and tried to fix it. So you've just bounced from place to place.
Right.
Because be careful. Cheap can be very expensive. And yeah, we've definitely seen if it is after you have users, as Ruben said, it's really bad when you've had good press, and your site is breaking.
Right.
Super sad.
What about the idea of cost? And I know companies really are concerned with that, but the problem is it's very hard to throw out a dollar figure because it's sort of like it could cost several thousand or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. How can companies be prepared for cost? And as a separate question, take your pick which one you want to answer. Is it a good idea for a company to see an app that they like and emulate it and say, how much would it cost to build that particular app? So they have a really specific idea. So, but the general question is cost. Alex, what's your sense? What do you tell people about cost?
Sure. I mean, I think there's no kind of rules of thumb. It absolutely depends on your specific situation. I think the one thing is the more information you can have on what you're trying to build, the better someone's going to be able to estimate your costs. So, if you have, there's apps that you can build prototypes in, such as Envision app and different ones like that, where you can kind of come up with a pretty good feel for what your app's going to look like, and then kind of try to approach someone for them to kind of be able to estimate that as well. I think the other thing I mentioned is basically depends on the overhead and what your kind of team structure is. Are you going to be just hiring a single developer, or are you hiring a whole team? And depending on that, the cost is going to be definitely different as well. One other factor is the platform. I mean, let's say for example you're going to be targeting iOS, but also doing Android. I mean, that's almost going to double your costs because you're not going to be able to share much of the mobile code. The back end you'll be able to share, but the mobile code you won't. So it just depends. I mean, smaller apps, anything from $20,000 to $40,000 could get you started, but it can go up to hundreds of thousands to millions. So it's very hard to kind of come up with an example. I would say, I mean, looking at other apps is a good idea, just to be able to kind of get ideas on what the app should look like and the functionality, and you kind of get ideas they can kind of apply to your own specific situation, and that's definitely not a bad way to go.
Ruben, what do you tell people about cost? Is there someone to give a ballpark figure?
Well, I think we should start with just in general software estimation, whether it's for a mobile app or for any other application. Estimation is part art and part science. The art part of it is based on all the unknowns with any kind of platform. So you're dealing with a new version of iOS, you're dealing with a new language, you're dealing with a new device, you're dealing with any things that are sort of unexplored and new, and that part is really hard to estimate because unless you've done some prototyping or done some work with it, you kind of don't know what you're getting into. So let's leave the art part aside and focus kind of on the science side. So on the science side, the first question is, do you have a clear idea of what your requirements are? If you do, now you have a shot at getting a reasonable estimate. If you don't, it's sort of a guessing game. One way of guessing is by analogy. Certainly, is there another application that's 90%, 99% of what we want? You could use that as an analogy, but you would still need to know how much it costs to have that other app built in order to be even able to compare. Most of the time, I find that people don't have a clear set of requirements. It's just the nature of doing new things, and Agile is sort of a way to deal with that. You say, we'll chunk this up into X week iterations, and this is going to be the cost per iteration, and this will be the scope per iteration. So you're essentially spreading your risk out over an extended period of time. I would definitely avoid anybody who tries to give you a low-ball fixed cost estimate for what is obviously, it's sort of like, is this deal too good to be true? If it is, it probably is too good to be true.
Well, yeah, it gets back to what Tim was saying in terms of you build it, but of course that's actually only step one. Building the entire thing and getting it live in the field is only step one. Then it becomes updating it and what the costs are for that. So it's a whole other question.
Yeah, and along with cost, you've got quality and you've got timeline, right? So you may get an app that just may not be very good, or it may not come out in the timeline that you expected. And as Alex pointed out, are there things outside of the application that they have forgotten to estimate? Many times for a mobile application, people forget the actual back end or the web services that have to be built in order to support that mobile application. and they kind of assume that the app developer for the mobile app is going to build those. So if you need to build a back end that can pull in feeds, content from other places, and clean them up and display them and capture user input and store it and maybe even display it on the website, that's almost like building a second app, except it's running on the website. So it's very important for whoever looks at your project to kind of systematically break it down and kind of think through how they're estimating it and have them explain to you how they came up with their estimate, what they're basing that on, and what are some of the things that they think are gotchas or areas that they can't estimate because they don't have enough information.
Tim, what do you tell people about cost, and is there a way for you to throw out, not necessarily your own shop, but you say, I've seen this kind of an app done for this amount, or this kind of an app done for this amount. It's a Cadillac, it's a Toyota.
That's the only part that works. It's a loose ballpark. Even if they come to me with those specs, their specs are wrong. The trick about building software is 50% of the way through, you actually know what you're trying to build, unless you're actually trying to clone something. And that's a certainly different case. Like we're not the sort of developer to go to build an exact clone. You're exploring what the product is, and so it's very challenging to estimate, which is why you can get a rough ballpark of, hey, how much would it cost to build an app like this or of this scale? And even though they're like, oh, it's e-commerce, it'll look like an e-commerce one, they're really just big buckets of, are you trying to do an MVP? Are you trying to do a first version that has real users? Are you trying to do the full version that scales up a little more? Like it's a spectrum around how much money you have and time and the features. And even those are kind of loosey-goosey because we've worked with people with similar scope projects where we estimated 40K and got it done in 22K for an MVP.
Yeah, okay.
And we've seen people where we tell them, hey, 50 is going to get you there, and that's not even beginning to start. A lot of it is the discipline. When you say MVP, it's a very complicated word.
Right.
It breaks down.
Minimally viable product.
Yeah.
Does different things to different people.
A lot of my job is to tell the product people, you can't have all that, you can't have all that. And a lot of the discipline of how willing someone is to not be attached to their idea, but to solving the problem and refine it really affects that scope.
Right.
So what I'll end up doing is giving you large ballparks of this would be about what you would get in that, and then over time we refine what features are in or out. I say trying to hit a exact price goal per feature is like trying to dock with the space station by turning on off all your steering thrusters and hitting go. You're like, we're going to get to 150 and we're going to have this feature set, and you're going to be wrong. 60 to 80% of software projects fail, and part of why Agile helped that was it said, hey, rather than defining success as this exact spec sheet on this exact budget, let's get into it and collaboratively figure out how long it'll take.
Right.
If you're working with people that know what they're doing, they'll deliver enough projects that they can tell you, we can deliver a working version of this with some of these features for this sort of range. Which exact features are in, we should actually not turn now anyways,
right.
Because it's much different once you have it in your hands and you're having your users' hands and they're using it. And if this feature that takes 30% of the budget isn't the one that anyone cares about, why would I want to spend the time building it?
Right.
Drive it from a user study. Drive everything from real results. Drive it from a user study. Determine this is the feature we should spend our time on. So anything other than time and materials, agile-based work for consulting, I think, is doing a disservice to the developer and the client, actually.
What about the sort of a natural gap there between engineering and design in this? Because how can you bridge that gap? It seems like it's one of the biggest gaps in there. When you have a sense of how do you put these two worlds together of engineering and design and mobile app?
So so basically I think they work actually together pretty well. It's just like when you build a house, you need somebody to kind of take your high-level rough ideas and translate them into something visual that you can then react with. The fact of the matter is the human visual system is probably the most developed part of our brain. So we do consume information much better visually. So I think the first step is take ideas and words that are kind of running around in your head, work with a designer, or if you're working with a development shop, usually they know a good designer, or maybe they have a good designer in-house, and sit down and at least get some rough ideas, some rough wireframes, some rough sketches, just to get something on paper visually before you write a single line of code. That's your cheapest way of, I think, de-risking your project right at the outset. And it's something that I find that some people wait too long for, or they think they don't want to spend the money on design up front, and they end up spending 10 times as much on development later on.
Is that your thing about getting stuff on paper? You mean a flow chart? You mean a literal interface? What are they getting on
so
paper?
You start, the simplest things to start with are wireframes. So if you come in with just a basic rough idea, the first step you want is wireframes. Wireframes are very low resolution ideas of the screens involved, the rough cuts of the functionality involved, and gives everybody sort of an idea of what the app needs to do. The second step you can do is do a little bit of a higher fidelity prototype. You could do Photoshop files, OmniGraph, InVision, any of these tools. There's so many of them out there. Depending on what your designer is most familiar with and comfortable with, they can use that to put a little color, a little style, a little look and feel to those wireframes. Just very much, again, like an architect. He's going to draw the sticks, lay them out, give you a rough idea, and maybe do a little bit more high fidelity prototype on the computer if need be. So same process, and then you go and build, where obviously the cost is going to get a lot higher when you start constructing. So I say, in my opinion, I think design is very critical, and I think it should be done up front at the very least once, if not continuously throughout the project. But at least you should invest in it at least once in the beginning, even if very minimal. Simply, you can view it as a de-risking, but more realistically, you can view it as a way of making sure that your product's actually usable to your end users. So I think it's vital to do that up front and then go into development.
Tim, I know it's a subject that's close to your heart, right? Bridging that gap between design and engineering. I mean, how do you make that big Grand Canyon jump between those two worlds, and how do you keep engineering in its place sometimes?
So everything Ruben said is definitely spot on. I think there's a little history that's important here. People have been doing design a long time successfully up front. So upfront design had a heyday. And then it was part, though, of waterfall development. And so people would design everything out, and then you can get very good over your specs there, but that doesn't really work how the actual software works. So then Agile won for the last decade, and you shipped a design to your development team, and they ripped it apart into these little feature stories. And it was thrown over the fence, and they implemented all the parts, but 1/10 of them on the important parts. And now your product vision and your design is a shambles. Design really is like the product voice in the process. Mm-hmm. So then Lean UX, which has come up between all of us a couple times, came around and said, hey, how do we sort of return iteration throughout this whole process? Get iteration in earlier. For one thing, the design is far cheaper to iterate on than the development. So definitely do, as Ruben said, do that design up front, start exploring the idea. The thing that needs to be done then is don't stop. Keep that iteration through your user cycle. Use the design to inform the development, and keep communication through. Back when I got started doing this 15 years ago, we would just sit a designer down with a developer and work through a project. And lately, in the last sort of decade of Agile, that almost started to feel revolutionary. That you would just pair a designer and a developer and they'd collaborate, but that's so inefficient for the developer. So I'm willing to be less efficient for the developer on the simple vector math of if it's 60 miles an hour this way versus 100 miles an hour this way, I'll take that 60 if it's the right direction.
Right, which one is typically 60 and 100, just to
clarify?
clarify?
So I'm saying, like, the designer slowing down the developer to do the right thing, you're only going 60 miles an hour, but you're going the right direction. Versus,
right.
Oh, perfect Agile, the developer, it's driven by development costs. So you're going 100 miles an hour, but you're not going in the right direction.
Right.
So there are a lot of techniques that we could talk through about lifestyle guides, like everything being built from, like, Bootstrap and Foundation started to popularize this, and starting to deprivilege a little the engineering challenge and more move it back into design-driven. In this case, though, the challenge is you have to have sort of as a foundation solid Agile practices, and you have to have solid design practices, and then put them together. So I get tired of hearing. I heard at a large consultancy a while back. Oh, we did everything the client asked for. It was a technical success. I went, no one wants the product, and it wasn't designed, but it was a technical success. So,
Great.
like, never gonna hear that again. I've always felt like this, so we'll just go off and make sure we do it perfectly right. And there were some years of learning there to how to bridge those. It was non-trivial. Designers think developers are just sort of making up how hard everything is, and developers think designers are prima donnas that want things in these challenging ways for no good reason. So
right.
you have to have a team that works well together that has techniques and experience bridging that gap, which is one reason to consider going with a shop that can do both of them, that has a lot of it, or even if not can do both of them, has a lot of experience working closely between design and development in a continuous iterative process the whole way. If you just do the design up front, which is super important, and then the designer's off, I think it's a failure.
Makes sense.
Don't get enough design done up front, I don't think it works well either.
What about, and Alex, if you can, like, one last question I think is important for us. If we look to the future for a second, when we're talking about mobile applications, 2 to 4 years from now, how is this process going to be changing? And if we had the same conversation, say, several years or a few years in the future, what will we be talking about in terms of mobile application development?
Sure, yeah, I think you're already starting to see this. I think one kind of important pattern is you're going to be having a lot more smaller interactions, maybe across different types of devices versus one device, one application you're going to open and just stay in that application. So you're even starting to see that with iOS application. Have the extension capability where different apps you can kind of sew together an experience through all these different applications that kind of call each other through the interaction essentially. So it's not just one major app. And as well as wearables and things like that will kind of enhance this as well. So you can kind of start an interaction maybe on the iPhone and then go to your watch and then go to a smart home. So more and more of these types of devices are going to start proliferating. So you're going to have to kind of think of it as a system perspective, not just an app perspective. How do you tie together all these different interactions? I mean, another example is beacons, kind of location-specific technologies that kind of will tie into where the location is, where inside you're at, and then tie that into your app as well. So I think we're starting to see that too. So that's one thing that I don't think anyone's mentioned is you don't want to kind of start with for example, your web applications. You don't necessarily want to translate that directly to your app. And this is going to be more and more important as these types of interactions start happening. Is that you don't want to just take your web page and build a direct application with that. You want to think of what the user is going to be doing, what the tasks, the goals are, and how they're going to be interacting across all these different types of devices. So that's one thing. And then I'm curious to see how the different technologies play out. Because right now you have to, when you're writing a native app, you have to write one in, Android, iOS, and it could be all different type of technologies. So I think, I see some things that are more technologies that are familiar to it, more people like JavaScript and React Native that are coming out. So hopefully there'll be kind of an easier experience to develop these apps across, the different platforms. Not necessarily write once, run many, but just where you can kind of be familiar with one technology and kind of write all these different aspects of it.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? There are these two major competing platforms that need different code. It's sort of like it says this whole technology is very much in its infancy. We need one platform somehow. Like I said, it's a larger philosophical discussion which we can't solve today.
I think we're actually going to be talking about the same question in 2 to 4 years, and the battle is still kind of ongoing between HTML5 versus native apps, and that's I think it's obviously a trade-off, but I think it is becoming easier and easier to do that. So hopefully that trend will continue in the future as well.
Ruben, what does the future hold? Where are we going? Looking into your crystal ball, what's going to be 36 months from now, a huge amount of time from now, in the world of mobile apps?
Well, I think it's always dangerous to try to predict the future, especially in technology, where everybody's trying to change it every minute. But I mean, I can tell you just near term, some of the higher quality applications out there have a strong consideration for the offline experience. And so if you look at apps, a lot of apps are built with the assumption that the cellular network's available everywhere. And a simple example is you walk into an elevator in a large building and the app is off. Now what does it do? How does it behave? So I think just simply better ways of dealing with the offline experience, bringing that more into the platform level rather than having each app deal with it individually. I think that'll be sort of a key area people will continue to evolve and develop. Certainly, as Alex mentioned, all of the additional devices that are now sort of using the app on your phone as a hub, I think that is a really interesting space. And we've got things like the watch, smartwatches, which get a lot of press as companion devices. But I think you can think of a lot of other things that are more stationary and embedded in your everyday life. Your television, your thermostat, your lights, your car, all of these things. And every single one of those things I mentioned has multiple companies investing lots of money in making them full-fledged computers that can run their own apps. So now you have to start thinking of an app not as a standalone thing, but as a participant in an ecosystem of other apps. And they all have to communicate with each other and synchronize with each other and kind of work together. So your app has to know you got home and let you know that now you can turn on your TV or all of these kind of intelligent things. So I think that's an area that as the infrastructure gets built out, we'll see a lot of implications for everyday app developers to consider. And then lastly, I think and I won't go into the cross-platform issue because Alex covered that pretty well, but I think also another area is the international market and designing for different languages, different cultures, and different form factors of phones that are accepted around the world, and sort of cross-cultural pollination of applications. WhatsApp is a great example of an app that was able to do really well because they figured out what the different kinds of phones are, feature phones in different countries, and optimize and develop for that. But I think as we exhaust markets over here, in the West, we'll start looking east to see if we can get into those markets, and that's going to cause a little bit of growing pain for us, and potentially vice versa.
Makes sense. I think sometimes my phone wants to call my refrigerator. And those two things are going to have a conversation. I don't know what they're talking about, but they seem to be communicating constantly. Tim, the future, a few years from now, what are we going to be talking about when we talk about mobile?
Both we're thinking not conservatively enough and not liberally enough at the same time. We're always doing to predict the future. But you're not going to get away from two platforms. You're going to have an explosion of platforms. I mean, the Internet of Things. As the processing power develops, the limitations of the phone stop being limitations and they become more and more supercomputers. Mm-hmm. Simultaneously, then we have an explosion of form factors of watches and devices getting powerful enough not to be firmware, but almost approaching real OSs. I mean, they have been for quite a while now. But
we're talking about serious platforms between iOS and Android, and a real major platform in addition to those two.
Well, I'm saying all the Internet of everyone trying to win the Internet of Things, and then iOS is exploding into that. So even if Android and iOS are the big mobile ones for a while, even those continue to get more complex. And at the same time, as you have extensions and you have use cases that make your phone more of a true computer, you start getting new devices where it's, again, different form factors that are limited. And how does your car work and how does your phone work? And no one in the last 20 years has wanted to seed the living room, so there's not an easy Internet of Things answer. Everyone wants to be the hub. Everyone wants to connect all these, so there's just platforms fighting it out. And Apple obviously has its slow-moving entry where it creeps iOS into everything methodically, and then Android does its approaches, and then all the the Asian manufacturers, Samsung's, all try to do their approach. So I certainly do not predict you seeing there be any less platforms in the near future. The definition of mobile might start to get a little kludgy.
Right.
That's why people talk about touch a lot, because the interfaces are what matter. Like whether or not it's mobile it is touch at a certain size and connectivity, and what's the interface of your watch, and what's the interface of your car. Is your car a mobile? It's the original most mobile of mobiles, but you say programming for it isn't mobile. not right now, but what happens when there is iOS on your car? What does that look like?
Right.
So the platforms, even if they just stayed those two big winners, which they aren't, they're going to explode in complexity of how you build for them. So the definition will start to become, what do you mean by mobile? There's going to be plenty of work to build phone apps, though, for the foreseeable future. And just like Internet 6 stayed around forever, the phones stay around for long enough that it's what's your base case of your lowest level model of your phone that you're worried about. So there will be quote-unquote mobile developers, but there will also be whole new realms of what that actually means. And yeah, don't forget that there were feature phones, but within 2 days of your phone getting stolen, it's almost actually shipped somewhere else. To Africa and some other developing nations. Like the smartphones are going everywhere, and when you sell them, they end up everywhere. That it won't be feature phones everywhere. This is a lot of the world's like computer and web browsing experience.
Right.
If you don't think that will explode in ways we haven't yet figured out, that Silicon Valley's sort of myopic view of its own needs hasn't figured out yet, then I think we'll be surprised.
Interesting. Okay.
I think one other thing that I don't think we mentioned is kind of the enterprise. I think that's one untapped market that we're going to see a lot more mobile adoption in as well, and building kind of more mobile-based apps that target your specific enterprise. I think that's another huge trend that's going to happen, and a lot more work available for that.
I have long been a proponent of enterprise developers and enterprise people being people too, so we need to save them from .NET and like old like J2EE. I've definitely taught like Ruby seminars at giant enterprises before, and the level of tooling that exists is such that it's recently flipped on its head. When Pivotal did their relaunch and rebrand, they said consumer-grade applications or for the enterprise or something like that. Where rather than talking about enterprise grade, everyone's finally admitting the enterprise is so far behind on the consumer experience that we definitely have some clients that we're doing a lot of work on in the enterprise for like modernizing their sales tools for a tablet experience for the showroom floor, for instance.
Interesting. Well, there are clearly many, many changes, and I think the word is explosion. I think, Tim, I agree with that word, explosion. There'll be no simplicity is not in our future. That I can guarantee you. Yep. Gentlemen, I greatly appreciate your expertise. I'll send you the link. We can all tweet about it, and we can all view it on our smartphone. And thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks. Thank you.